Welcome everyone. Today finds me in Naples, Florida in the parking lot of a CVS store. What's so interesting about that? There is something so unusual and such an interesting story about this parking lot, I just had to share it with you. Because this CVS, this parking lot, is shared by an old cemetery. Not very big, with an Enterprise on one side, a CVS on the other. This cemetery contains some of the oldest residents of the city of Naples, as well as an unbelievable story. So let's walk around, find the entrance to the cemetery, and I'll tell you all about it. By the way, right there is US 41, otherwise known as Tamiami Trail. Remember that road? It's going to play a role in the story I'm about to tell you. You can see there's a historical marker there. We'll walk inside. Not many graves in here. The ones that are here tell a story of the history of the area. Bell Leonard's, 1871 to 1896. (1846 to 1924), there's John Weeks, Nancy Weeks, and Madison Weeks, with no dates. Robert Davis, who died in 1934. And there's only a couple of dozen grave sites at most. So let's see the story of Rosemary Cemetery. Opened in 1931, Rosemary Cemetery was originally established on 20 acres of land given by Edward Creighton, a prominent Naples citizen. It served as the town's only cemetery until 1955. The graves of several pioneer families were moved to the site during the 1930s from the earlier cemetery at 3rd Street and 10th Avenue. The last known interment occurred in 1947. That's where the story gets interesting. You see, Mr. Clayton donated 20 acres of land, and this is all that's left. This little tiny piece of land, about the same size as the adjacent CVS parking lot. I'm going to do a count of the headstones and see how many graves are accounted for. 23. Only 23 marked graves here. How is that possible? They had 20 acres of land. They had to move the cemetery. You might think it was because they were running out of space, but it really is because of the economic development of the area. This was on the outskirts of town, and look at it now. It's on an extremely busy road. We're going to head down the street where I'm going to tell you the story of a map that was written in 1944. Now I'm at the corner of Goodland Frank and Pine Ridge Road. This is an extremely busy intersection. I hope you can hear me over the traffic and the wind. And there's an unusual thing at this busy intersection. This is no small neighborhood intersection. You can see it is a really busy intersection. And yet, right off to the side, you see 4 small pillars. Now right now, each one of these pillars was commemorated by some flowers. This one has recently been reinforced. Here's another one, also reinforced. I saw on an old news story where these were knocked over. There's a 3rd pillar. And it's worth noting there is nothing written on these pillars at all. And here's the 4th. It's hard to get a definitive story, but it's generally accepted that these are grave markers, unmarked graves, with the exception of these 4 pillars. Who could possibly be buried in this small strip of land at this busy intersection. According to a 1944 map, there are possibly 8 bodies buried right at this intersection. That map shows 8 dotted rectangles and an annotation that says 8 Negro graves, unmarked. Is it possible 8 people are buried here? Not only possible, but it's highly likely. Back in 1930, 20 acres of land were donated for the cemetery, and yet Rosemary Cemetery is just a small little place. Also, according to that same map, this is labeled Plot N. There's a Plot W that is now paved over, and there's a Plot B, or Unit B, and that is the current Rosemary Cemetery. But how is it possible that 8 graves could go unmarked and they could be building roads over a cemetery? Well, how is it possible that Plot W would be paved over? We know that the cemetery was moved around about 1930. We also know that 20 acres of land was donated for the new cemetery. It certainly wasn't used, or was it? Was that cemetery used and then just arbitrarily paved over as people needed more and more land? We also know that back in the 1930s, 1940s, there was a lot of segregation, not only with how people lived, but where they were buried when they died. So it's possible that this is a part of the cemetery that is separate from where the rest of Rosemary Cemetery now is. But wouldn't somebody know who was buried here? There are a lot of rumors, and they've been going on for decades. Some people say that the bodies here were the result of a bar fight. Others say that they were workers who died while building the railroad that used to pass right down this street. Still others say that they were workers who were building the Tamiami Trail. Nobody really knows. I have a theory. This is based really on nothing other than the absence of information. So here's what I think may have possibly happened. Perhaps when the cemetery was moved, they did it in a careless fashion and nobody knew who these bodies were, so they just went unmarked. Based on how they treated the rest of the cemetery, paving it over, I would say it's not only plausible, but very likely. One thing we do know, there was a reason that somebody on that 1944 map indicated 8 rectangles and made a notation that 8 bodies were buried here. We may never find out the truth unless someone goes through the effort of digging beneath this spot. All we have right now are these 4 markers on this extremely busy part of Naples, Florida. Whatever the true story, it's nice to know that at least some of these early pioneers were not forgotten, including the largest headstone over here marked Mother. Given what happened to the rest of these graves, moved, kind of forgotten, paved over in many cases, it's not unreasonable to think some bodies would have been buried and simply forgotten. There are the 4 pillar markers. That's something. Maybe in the future, this mystery will be solved. Tell me what you think is a true story behind these unknown graves. As always, I encourage you to like and share the videos. Leave your comments below. If you haven't already, please subscribe by clicking my face in the corner. Don't forget to ring that bell icon. That way you'll know when I post new videos. From Naples, Florida, I'm Mark, and this is the Average Me Channel.